Good morning.
Good morning.
The reading. On the day of Pentecost, all the believers were meeting together in one place. Suddenly there was a sound from heaven like the roaring of a mighty windstorm, and it filled the house where they were sitting. Then they looked like flames or tongues of fire appeared and settled on each one of them. And everyone present was filled with the Holy Spirit and began speaking in other languages, as the Holy Spirit gave them this ability. At that time there were devout Jews from every nation living in Jerusalem. When they heard the loud noise, everyone came running, and they were bewildered to hear their own languages being spoken by the believers. They were completely amazed. "How can this be?" they exclaimed. "These people are all from Galilee, and yet we hear them speaking in our own native tongues. Here we are, Parthians, Medes, Elamites, people from Mesopotamia, Judea, Cappadocia, Pontus, and the province of Asia, Phrygia, Pamphylia, Egypt, and the areas of Libya around Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs. We all hear these people speaking in our own languages about the wonderful things God has done." They stood there amazed and perplexed. "What can this mean?" they asked each other.
Die anderen aber hatten in ihrer Sprache und sprachen, sie sind voll süßen Weins. Flinks überlegte es Petrus. Da tat Petrus auf einen Elf, erhabte seine Stimme und redete zu ihnen: "Ihr Juden, liebe Männer, und alle, die ihr in Jerusalem seid, das sei euch kundgetan, und lasst meine Worte zu euren Ohren getan. Denn diese sind nicht getrunken, wie ihr wähnet, ist es doch erst die 3. Stunde am Tage, sondern das ist, das durch die Propheten Joel zuvor gesagt ist."
「喺最後嘅日子，上帝話：我會將我個靈倒喺所有人身上，所以你兒女會講預言，你嘅年輕人會見到雲霧，而你哋老人家會發夢。喺嗰個日子，我會將我個靈倒喺我僕人身上，無論男女，佢哋都會講預言。我要喺天上嘅奇蹟，喺地上造成神蹟，血、火同煙雲。喺耶和華嗰個偉大而光輝嘅日子到來之前，太陽會變成黑紋，而月亮會變成血紅色。但係凡呼耶和華名嘅人都會得救。
Word of God, word of life.
Thanks be to God. I invite you to be seated. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Happy Pentecost, which means we say also, happy birthday to the church. I really just love that Elmo's red, and I can put him on the screen because it feels appropriate for Pentecost Sunday, right? Also, the mass chaos that feels like would ensue if Elmo was in church feels appropriate to the Holy Spirit as well, right? It's the day when we celebrate the giving of the Holy Spirit to the early ecclesia, that earlier church, that earliest Christ-following community. Now, let's be clear. This isn't the birthday of the Holy Spirit. She has been around since the beginning of time. She's the breath, the ruach, if you will, that hovers over creation. And she, since then, has been creating order out of chaos, and sometimes chaos out of order. Today is the day when we mark when she made her powerful presence known to those first Christ followers, that early community in Jerusalem, who, by the way, let's be clear, right, are still Jewish at this point in time. We know this from the texts that tell us they are in Jerusalem to celebrate the festival of Pentecost, which was not Pentecost as in the giving of the Holy Spirit at that point, but it was this thing that happens 50 days after Passover, which is the festival of first fruits. So 50 days after Passover, the faithful Jewish community would come to Jerusalem to mark the beginning of their harvest, to bring the first fruits as an offering to God. Which, now that I think about it, could have made a really good stewardship talk on a Sunday morning of Pentecost, talking about bringing our first fruits, but maybe next year. I had most of this sermon written before I figured that out, right? Anywho, they gather following their tradition, following what is familiar, following what they know, and everything changes. A mighty wind blows, a rushing wind loud enough that you can hear it. Tongues as a flame appear above heads, and everybody begins speaking in languages that they don't actually know. In short, chaos ensues, right? The Holy Spirit has done what she often does in her infinite wisdom and comes and creates chaos out of order. She does what she regularly does and disrupts the comfortable and the familiar. Again, right, the disciples 50 days out from the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, 10 days out from Christ's ascension into the heavens, has already gone back to what they know. They've already gone back to the familiar. They've already gone back to what was. And the Spirit comes to create chaos. And here's where I'm going to be really honest. I think as Lutherans, and I will admit I am in this group, particularly American Lutherans, we can be a little uncomfortable with the idea of chaos in worship. Right? We can be a little uncomfortable with the idea of the Spirit and the movement and the chaos because we tend to be God's frozen chosen. I used to think this meant because we lived in the Midwest. Turns out, so I Googled frozen chosen to get this picture. This is a literal webpage on a Presbyterian church's website in Houston, labeled God's Frozen Chosen, How to Worship with the Presbyterians in Houston. It's not just in the Midwest that we're the frozen chosen, right? We tend to be less happy clappy and woo, all go in worship. We like order and liturgy and pre-written prayers. We don't really do emotive, spirit-led prayer or speaking in tongues. We tend to leave that to the Pentecostals, go figure. But more than this, here's what I know. More than just the discomfort with the chaos, as a group of Lutherans, we tend to be focused on gifts freely given, right? Grace freely given that asks nothing of us to receive us. So when we come to talking about what faith asks of us, it can feel a little bit tricky. And Pentecost is one of the days that asks something of us. That Spirit, yes, is a gift freely given, as much as we don't like it sometimes. But the Spirit blows and lights tongues of fire over us and sometimes under us to get us moving, but it asks something of us. It doesn't allow us to remain in our comfort and in what we know. And in today's reading, our ancestors in faith, that first group of Christ followers, are learning this the hard way. Because the Spirit comes in and uprends and disrupts every single thing they think they knew. And then, rather than letting them remain comfortable, she sends them out to the communities around them. Now, it's important to note, like I said earlier, the giving of today's Spirit is to a gathered community, and they are the religious insiders, right? We hear there were devout Jews, and they were both Jews and converts to Judaism. They were the religious insiders of the days, the one who knew the things, the traditions, the shoulds, the supposed tos, the liturgies. And she isn't there to reward them for good worship or right action, right? She is there to disrupt them. She isn't there to say, good job, you can stay here where it is comfortable. She is there to do what she often does. For better or worse, the Holy Spirit is there to disrupt the familiar. She is there to move them from the familiar and the comfortable old traditions into the new things that they are being called to as Christ followers, and move them she does. Right? They start prophesying and sharing the story of what God has done, not just to those who can understand what they are saying, but in languages of all types, in languages that nobody in that room knew how to speak, and yet they learn how to speak them in that moment. They learn how to make that experience known, not just to the familiar, but to everybody. And again, it is chaos. We know this because those watching it assume they are drunk. And Peter says it's too early for them to be drunk. That's not possible. Peter's never been to St. Patty's Day or Mardi Gras. But it's also a reminder, a wake-up call of what it was that Jesus came to do, right? Jesus didn't come to the familiar. He didn't come to maintain status quo, to leave religious leaders and followers in isolation. He came to literally flip tables, to challenge the familiar, to share a wider, more expansive picture of God's love, to remind them that God's love was not just for those in the gathered community, but for all. And so the Holy Spirit comes to remind them as a faith-forming community that they are called to follow in her footsteps or her wind steps. They're called to follow her path, right? To disrupt the familiar and the comfortable. And she invites them to push against the status quo as well. I forgot to mark this. There we go. Thank you. Right? She invites them to push against the status quo as well. And I love that in the face of the unfamiliar and the uncomfortable, the new, Peter does what we all are called to do as well, to go back to our scriptures, right? Peter goes to Joel to help folks make sense of the unsensible, to know what is happening, even if it isn't the cheeriest of visions from Joel. We kind of miss out on it when we read it in German and other languages, but it starts out okay, right? Joel says, in the last days I will pour out my spirit upon all people. Your sons and daughters will prophesy. Your young men will see visions, and your old men will dream dreams. And I will pour out my spirit even on my servants, men and women alike. They will prophesy. I have to admit that I love these verses about the old men will dream dreams and the young will have vision and prophesy, because this feels a little like a flip as well. Because we often think about prophecy being predictions of the future. This is just a side note. We often think about prophecy being predictions of the future, but in biblical writings, prophecy means to bear witness. It means to see what things are as the future, not to make predictions about what will come, except in that so far as if we continue down this path, this is where we are headed, right? But we often think about our young dreaming dreams of their future and their hopes, right? What do you dream of when you get older? And we think of our elders having the wisdom to name the reality and to bear witness. But Peter says that it will be the other way around, that our elders will have the hopes and the dreams of future, and our youngers will see wisdom that we are to listen to. There is a flip in and out of this. And then it gets a little bit scary after the beauty of this. Because God continues, I will cause wonders in the heaven above and signs on the earth below, blood and fire and clouds of smoke. The sun will become dark and the moon will turn blood red before the great and glorious day of the Lord arrives. Yay! Less cheery, but just as real. Just as real in faith, right? Because the reality is that sometimes things come to an end. The reality is sometimes chaos ensues. The reality is that the wisdom of faith is that faith and hope and dreams are often held alongside change and disruption and chaos. which brings us right back to the beginning, literally, the beginning of time, where the Spirit is the Spirit who moves to create order out of chaos. And yes, chaos out of order. The Spirit who moves us from the familiar to the new, to the familiar to the new, back and forth again in flow. Yes, there will probably be some scary things that happen. I don't know about the sun becoming dark and the moon turning red, but things will end, things will change. But it also means new things are beginning. Here in commencement season, how many of you have been invited to, attended, or heard about a graduation happening in the last, let's go 3 weeks? Heard about them, seen them, yeah, whatever. They're happening all over the place. I was driving downtown Houston the other day, and the number of high school students or maybe college students in their robes walking around was unreal. I think that was more people than graduated in my entire class walking around downtown. When I graduated high school, I thought that the word commencement meant ending. How many of you maybe had this thought, right? I thought it meant ending. Turns out, it means beginning. To commence means to begin, to start. Yes, commencement was the end of one thing, but it was the beginning of something new. Don't know if you've ever noticed this, but commencement often happens around the same time as Pentecost. Every year, they happen about the same time. So I wonder if a better image for Pentecost isn't the birthday of the church, but our commencement. Kind of literally, it is the beginning of the church, but also it is the end of one way of being. It is the end of one set of learnings and our movement into a new way of being. And that will mean change and fires lit under us and above us. It will mean order out of chaos and chaos out of order. It will mean life and movement, and no matter how much it weirds us out, probably some Spirit-led and Spirit-full living and worship. So church, happy commencement. Congratulations, class of 2026, for Pentecost this year. As you go forth on this Pentecost Sunday, on this commencement Sunday from here, may you be so filled with the Spirit, so disruptive in doing the new thing as you follow Christ that you cause people to wonder, have the Lutherans become drunk on the Holy Spirit at 9 o'clock on the dot in the morning? And all of God's people said, I invite you to stand and join us in singing.